The data that you're looking at is data that I've scraped from Walmart. It's got loads of product information, number of reviews, pictures, everything. And also these three columns, which I've highlighted, which are the offer price. Now these are special offers that Walmart are running, and we can see where applicable, it's given us the previous price and the amount saved. And in this pivot table here, we can see these are the items that have the most savings to be had right now. So I'm going to show you how I've done this. It's quite simple, but we need to just keep track of a couple of things. So we're going to be looking for the API that the website gets the information from, and we're going to use Postman and then create a Python script to do that for us. So here's the website. This is the page at the top here. I'm in the Christmas gift section. You need to come to the inspect element tool and click on the network tab. And I find filtering by the XHR or XHR and fetch is the best way to find the information. So what we're looking for is something that pops up here that we can sort of have a look and we can see the response and check that we're getting JSON data. So I'm going to refresh the page with it recording, and it's going to pop up all of these things here. Now, I've done this before, and sometimes it's more obvious than others. But looking through this, you probably wouldn't think that there is any useful information there, and you'd be right. What I found with this website is you have to actually come right to the bottom and choose to go to the next page, still recording. And what's going to happen is it's going to pop up and we're going to be able to find the request for the data that is in here somewhere. So if I go to the top and we scroll down, it's underneath. So right here, we can see this one is called Get Deals List. So I'm just going to click on that one. We're going to make it bigger so we can all see. And I'm going to look at the headers and then preview the response. Now this looks a lot like a load of JSON data, and the fact that it starts with item and then product ID makes me think that this is exactly where we want to be. So scrolling across, we can see there's a load more information. If you're not sure what this is, if this is the data that you want, a good way to do is to copy the whole lot, head over in the browser to a JSON formatter. I like to use this one, or there's another one which is quite handy. Paste it all in there, hit process, and what we'll be given is nice formatted JSON data. So we can see right away this is what we've picked up from the inspect element on the server, and we can see there's items, and here's the title, and this is all the data that I picked up when I showed you at the start of the video. So how do we go about getting from this into our script? So I'm just going to come out of this right now. What we're going to do is we are going to copy this response, the get deals list, the one we had the JSON. If you hover over it and you right click and then go to copy as curl, and I just do curl and bash, and then come over to Postman. If you haven't used Postman before, it's basically a program that it's used for working with APIs and testing. You can either just Google Postman or I'll put a link down below. It's super easy to install. So what we want to do is don't want to click new, we want to hit import and then come over to raw text, and we'll paste everything in and scroll down, hit continue, and we'll get this warning, that's fine, and then hit import. So what we can do now is we can actually replicate that request that the website sent to the server to get all the information. So if I hit send, we'll get the JSON back, which is what we were just looking at. So this is all of the information that we want. So there's a couple of key things to note here. If I just scroll down, we can see all the parameters that we can get, and this is where we can control the page number we're on. So we can change it, hit send. I didn't show you the top item there, but we can see it's a different one. But the key thing that we need to know is the fact that we need to mimic all of the headers from our actual browser. So under the headers tab, I'll make this out of the way, because we've got all of these headers. Now this is a very important one here, the cookie. So without that, the website will identify us as a bot and we'll get blocked. So what we can do is we can actually take all of this out of Postman by clicking on the code button and coming down to Python requests, copying all of that, and then coming over to VS Code and hitting paste, and we can put it all into our code, into VS Code. Now, if I was to run this would do exactly what we just saw in Postman. It will put all of that information up, but it's going to print it, and that sort of clogs up the terminal, and it's awful. So I'm just going to make a few amendments before I do that first. We can see there's no payload here, which is okay, so I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to get rid of it out of our request as well. And I'm going to change response just to R, because it is easier to type. Now we know that our response that came back was a JSON object. So we can actually import JSON and then manipulate it like that. So I'm going to import JSON with a J. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a JSON object with our response that's coming back. So to do that, we can just say data is equal to JSON.loadS for load a string, r.text. And then we can print, let's say data and items. So let's see if that works. So we can see that that's basically, what we've done is we've created a JSON object with everything that we got back from that response. And we now have all of that information in our code saved in our data variable. So one thing that's really useful to know about this as well is when you're trying to work through the actual JSON data, trying to get and pull the information out that you're after, it's best to do that on a saved file, because if you keep sending requests to this server, it will recognize that you're doing unusual activity and it will put a captcha in your way. Another thing to note is that if you start to get blocked, go right back to Chrome, reload the page, maybe come into a private browser and go ahead and get another cookie. So we can see when we go back to our response, we've got this cookie down here in our request headers. So go ahead and generate another cookie and copy that and paste it in here and it should work again. Two cool things to note there. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save the response. So we've generated some JSON data here. I'm going to save this response. So I'm going to go save to file and I'm going to save that into my folder. And then I'm going to create a new Py file because we're going to use another Py file to open that response up. And then we're going to interrogate it and work out what information we want from it. If you aren't interested in all of the information that I had from the start and you just want some basic info, you could get it out this way. But I'm just going to show you how I sort of manipulate it a little bit. So we're going to save this Py file and we'll just call it JSON tester.py for, I'm not very good with file names, not very creative. So again, import JSON. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our response file that we've just saved. It's in the same folder as this. So we can do with open and it was called response.json. And we're just going to open it up as read. I'm going to do as f. And then we can do data is equal to load, JSON.load f. And if we do print data items, and I just run that to make sure I've done that right. I have. I'll just explain this real quick. So when we're doing JSON.load, we're doing load because we're loading an object from the file. If we were loading a string, like our response is here, we do s, load s for string. That's why that's different. And the items part comes from our JSON file here. And come back here. We can see that the first thing is items. So when we're referencing in our file, I'll just collapse that. We want the items. If we wanted something from here, we would then put faucets, whatever that word is. I don't know. And that's the other one. That's the only other one. So we could absolutely get any of this information, but because we want items, that is why we're calling items. And then we have the product ID, etc., here. So that's where that came from. So let's say that we wanted the product ID, the title, and then where's the price data? Let's say, I think it's in its own, here, primary offer. So let's say we want to capture this info with the offer price and the product ID and the title. So to do that, we would want to go, let's say we need to do a loop. So we want to do for item in data items. And then let's say print item, and it was called product ID with a capital, I think. So if we run that, nope, that's not the right key. Excuse me. Product ID, no capital D. Cool. So now we're going to get all the product IDs that are in that JSON file. So then we could do item title. And because Python is treating it as a dictionary, we're calling the keys here and asking for the values. So there's all the titles as well as the product ID. And now we could do the, I've forgotten what it's under now. It was primary offer, and then offer price. Okay, primary offer, and we can just chain them together, offer price. So now if we run that, we get the same thing again, but with the offer price. And we can see that it's actually failed here. And that means that one of the items must not have that key in. We can see that it's about 6 or 7 down. So it seemed that I had some that didn't actually have all of the data in, which is why I've done a try and except here to try and figure out what was going wrong. So I'm not entirely sure why. We probably have a look up and find it, but you get the idea of how you could extract each of the individual items that you would be interested in. So what is also really cool is that if we wanted to put this into a data frame that we could then analyze with Pandas, or we could export nice and easily, we can do that really easily with Pandas feature of JSON normalize. So let's import Pandas as PD, and we'll get rid of this here. And what we can actually do is just call df, which for data frame we can do pd.json normalize, and we can give it the data, and then we can just print df.head. Now what that's going to do is it's basically going to flatten all of the JSON out into columns for us where it recognizes it. So if we can see that, it's because I didn't call items. So it's flattened everything down into one thing. So we need to put the items in there. And now we can see that we've got something that looks a lot more like an actual data frame, which is really cool. So we're going to take this principle here, and we're going to work with that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go and loop through a few pages, and then we're going to get it to a point where we have a nice big long list of all of the data like I showed you at the start of the video. So if we keep in mind, we're going to be using this one. So back over here, I'm just going to collapse our headers for now because we've had a look at those and we understand those. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply our JSON normalize from our pandas. So I'm just going to copy that over to here, and then I'm going to do this as well. And I'm going to put that in there. So what we're doing is from our request, we are creating a JSON object, and then we're normalizing it with pandas to a data frame, and I'm just going to print the data frame.head again, so it's going to run the whole way through getting all the data from the website this time as opposed to saved on our disk. There we go, there it is. So we can see now how easy it is to get one page, but obviously we want to get multiple pages. So in the URL we can see here there is page is equal to. Now we can just manipulate that URL with an F string. So I'm going to change that to 2, hard code it in for the moment, and we're going to run this again, and we're going to see that the data is actually different. We've lost some of it in there because of the way that it's formatting it in my terminal, but it's all still there. So if we look at the first product ID was ends in TBC, we change it to 3, we can see here it's a different one. So we know that that works, that's great. So we basically just want to set up a little loop. It's up to you how many pages you want to go through. You have to bear in mind that we are simulating that we're a real user, so it's always good to put some time breaks in there. So I'm actually going to do that, and I'm going to import time whilst we're here. So if you send off too many requests like this to the server, it might recognize you're trying to cheat the data out, and it will block you. What we can do is we'll move all of this into a loop. We're going to create a blank data frame because that's what we're going to want to append everything to. Just like we do when we create our blank list and add everything to it, we're just going to create our blank data frame. So I'm just going to say prods for products, why not? And we'll say pd.dataframe. So we just call it like this with the square brackets inside. Now we can create our loop. I'm just going to move that. We'll leave that there. Now I'm going to do a range loop. So I'm just going to say for X in range, and that's going to count up to the pages that we're going to do. So for this demo, I'm just going to do 3 or 4 pages so you kind of see the process. But feel free to make this run longer and get all of the data. So and I'm going to call it page this time, in range 1 to 5. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 4 pages. And we can indent this, not delete, indent, there we go. So we need to put our URL in here. So I'm actually going to change this request now. I'm going to do request.get, so we can remove that. We don't need that there. And now I'm going to do URL here, and we can copy this, put our URL inside our loop. Let's comment that one out. turn it into an F string with the F, and over here where it says page is equal to 3, we want to put the number in that we're creating, which is just page, which is going to be this variable here. So every time this loops through, this variable page becomes the number, and then that goes into there. So that's going to loop through and get us each of the pages. So now we just need to, instead of creating a new data frame, we need to add our data frame to this one. This possibly isn't the best way to do it for loads and loads and loads of data. So if you had hundreds of thousands of lines, you wouldn't want to do it this way just because it's quite a bit of a resource hog. There would be other ways that probably better to do it, but seeing as we're only really dealing with, I think there was 2,000 items on that page, so lower quantities, I think it's absolutely fine to do it this way. So we would want to do prods for our data frame, and then we want to call it again .append. So we're basically just saying here's our data frame, this one, and it's now going to be this instead with this appended on it. And now we can put in our pd.json normalize, and then our data items, which is what we did here, this version there. And then we can say we want to ignore the index, otherwise it resets the index every time, and we don't want that. Okay, so now I'm just going to add in a quick time.sleep, and for the sake of they're only doing a few pages, I'm going to make it 3. If you're doing lots of pages, it would be worth making it longer, or even making it a random number each time. I don't know how much difference that makes, but maybe it might help. And now we want to just say, we want a print statement so we know that something's happening. So I'm just saying getting page, and we can use our F string again. And then we can just say waiting. There we go. So what that's going to do is going to loop through everything, and hopefully we'll have, every time it loops through, it's going to create a nice new data frame for us, add it to our main data frame, and then we can just export that. So we can do prods, which is our data frame .to CSV, and let's call it Walmart products.csv. So the main thing, I'm just going to run this and talk at the same time. So the main thing that we need to remember is to not have any errors. So ignore index isn't quite right. That's because I've missed a bracket. There we go. Had my brackets in the wrong place. So I'm just going to talk whilst we run this. So hopefully that ticks up nicely. So the few key things to remember are, make sure you look in the inspect element tool to try and find out if there's JSON data in there that you can get it out. I've done another video on this actually, which was scraping sports stats, which was quite cool. This is the same sort of thing, but for this website, we need to make sure that we copy the headers across as well. So all of these headers were ones that came from our browser when we actually initialized our first chat with the web page here. So over here, this is where our headers were. Now you can copy these directly into your code, like as long as they work in the same, as long as they're in the same format like this. I find it easier to go into Postman first, generate the requests, verify that they work, and then go ahead and copy that out and put it into our Python code. And also that way you can save a response as well that you can test. So we've managed to scrape 4 pages worth here. If I just find that file and open it up. So this is the one that we've just scraped. I forgot to remove the index. We can see we've got all of the same information here that I had before because I did it on the same sort of page. But here's our primary offer price and etc, etc. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Hopefully you found that useful and got something out of it. It's another cool way of getting data from a website. And if we look at the URL here, we can see right away the word API, which should tell you a bit about how we've been working with it. The server has to send the data to the main page to pick it up somewhere, and we've just kind of put ourselves and gone straight to the server and requested it as if we are a browser. So it's really important that you have those headers. Again, if you try this and you come back to it a day or so later and it doesn't work, the reason is you need a new cookie. So you need to go back to the page and get a new cookie like I showed you earlier and put it in here, and then it should work again for you. This is quite a rough and ready example of how this can be done. So it'd be cool to know if you've taken this concept and built something better than I have with it, which I'm sure you probably have because this is pretty rough and ready, as I said. So that'd be cool to hear from you. So make sure you drop a comment, like the video, subscribe, you know the deal, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.